Subscribe to Film Companion for your film fix. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.
I mean, I don't want to name films or TV series, but I can think of them where I'm watching and I'm like, why is the camera moving? I feel like the camera is honestly moving because somebody thought this will be cool, right? And I never think to myself, let's do it to look cool. You just got to trust that you're not trying to serve every single demographic. What you can only do is serve the one that you can speak most honestly to.
Alice, welcome to Film Companion. First of all, congratulations on the half of it. I love the film. It's just so wise and so warm and tender. It's just all sorts of amazing things. And you have lots of fans in India.
Oh,
so
thank you.
I have to begin by asking you about the sequence
Ex-villain.
from Ek Villain that made it to the movie.
No, it's yeah.
Well, I just wanted to ask you, are you a big Bollywood fan, and how did you decide on that specific sequence?
Yeah. So there are two things. One is I actually have a lot of Indian or South Asian friends in the US. And so I've definitely seen a Bollywood, but the main thing there is all through the film, I've been showing these like very sort of traditional Western classics, you know, Casablanca, Wings of Desire. And I really wanted something there to sort of hint at, like now that we've gotten used to, oh, City Lights, like we think it'll be another classic film that's, you know, I wanted us to sort of be like, no, it is another classic film, but it's not Western, right? Like this is a big, but like I wanted to just, it's subtle, but I just wanted for a brief moment, like everyone, you know, most people are not, and you'd be like, oh, and then be like, oh, I guess that makes sense. There is Bollywood. That's like a huge, like outside of the US, there's like a huge amount of like cinematic classics that are out there in Asia and India and, you know, Latin America. And then it so happened that like I happen to feel like a lot of the man or woman chasing after a train, it's quite popular in Bollywood. And I think there's actually honestly another film I'm basing on the name, but probably is the most famous one, but it's a woman chasing a man.
DDLJ.
Yes. So that would DDLJ, exactly. So that would have logically made the most sense, right? The only thing is that in Ik Villain, literally the framing of the woman on the train totally mirrored what we had shot for. So I was like, you know, it's just too delicious to have this, like, even though I know Ik Villain isn't like, honestly, it's not like a hugely romantic comment. Like, you know, it's a different tonally film. That whole sequence just visually worked so well that I ended up going with that one. Now, that said, I will confess that immediately, like my post producers came back and were like, yeah, you need to find a Western film because it's too hard for us to get the rights to this. Like, find another one. And I really pushed back because I was like, no, and it actually took my mobilizing all of my South Asian friends and emailing them all and being like, does anybody know? Because I guess the rights person said, oh, it's super hard to get rights to, I mean, it's going to be super hard. And literally within a weekend, all of them had emailed everyone. One is cousins with a well-known director named Ken Ghosh, who had worked with Balaji Tel. Yes. And then literally 6 different people ended up contacting this one guy at Balaji Telefilms, be like, you have to let this girl get like the rights to Ek Villain. Like someone went through Ekta Kapoor. And so that's how I finally got, but yeah, it was actually a number of weeks of here being told I couldn't have the clip because they couldn't figure out who to go to. And then relying on my friends to get there.
So Alice, this film is, of course, a sort of teen high school movie, but it's also so much more, you know, it is about intimacy, it's about friendship, it's about the immigrant experience, it's about sort of accepting yourself and who you are. And I was just wondering, as you were writing it, did you sort of have to be mindful of the things you wanted to say, not getting ahead of the characters and the actual storytelling?
I don't think so. I think I'm not really a message movie writer, but I also have I have my own personal beliefs. So it's really inevitable that what I ultimately believe probably does seep out. Like I fundamentally believe that most people, like the vast majority of us, are born good, right? And then I think most of us, given the resources, would choose to do the decent thing on a personal level, right? And I think that ends up coming out in my films where mostly there are no villains in my films. Like mostly it's just people who are, trying to do their best, but because we're all flawed, maybe we mess it up. But you can tell I'm not trying to drive that point home because I, in fact, let my characters do some really questionable things, right? Like Aster, no matter what she's sort of telling herself, she's kind of cheating on, I mean, she is cheating on her boyfriend, but she's trying to like couch it as like, well, maybe I'm just friends with this guy, right? Like, but she's aware, like Paul, who we spent most of the film falling in love with, ends up doing something that breaks our heart, like late in the film, right? Like I don't want these characters to try and be good. I don't actually personally find that interesting. I find it interesting to watch people who are making mistakes, but that fundamentally we do care about them and we identify with them because I don't know. I guess I think humanity skews toward wanting to connect, and I think when you want to connect, you can't help but care about other people.
Yeah. Tell me, do you have any rituals in terms of the writing process? Do you write every day, or does it just come? Is there a space?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have like die-hard rituals, like here's the method, but there are things that I do very often. Like I pretty much listen to music all the time while I'm writing. Usually it's music without words. And the other thing is which obviously I can't do when I'm actually typing, but I do need to move a fair amount. So I take a lot of walks while I'm like figuring something out. Which is obviously hard right now in the pandemic where we're all quarantined and I'm like not leaving my apartment, right? But also in this specific period, I'm not writing right now. But once I do, I think even in my apartment, I would just be pacing a lot. Like I think I physically have to move. I use a whiteboard. I have like one of those, it's like a sticky thing that you put on your wall. That's like what, and I whiteboard a lot. Like I'm somebody who's just constantly like outlining and outlining. So yeah, those are kind of the ways I go about it.
Alice, it's been such an intriguing journey. I mean, to have a master's degree from Stanford in computer science, go to Microsoft, work there for 5 years, then give yourself time to become a filmmaker with a deadline. Yeah. Make one critically acclaimed film, saving face, then don't make another for 15 years and then come back with the half of it. Do these breaks from the process of making movies and telling stories, how do they inform you as an artist? Do you feel like you get a better perspective because you're not doing this like constantly?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm sure I do, but I think the thing is this. I think it's why you take a break, right? Like I didn't say to myself, I think I need more perspective. I'm taking a break. I left the industry 10 years ago because my mom needed, long story short, she had some major health issues crop up and I dropped everything to move back home to take care of her. I mean, at first I thought it'd just be for a few months, but then it went on for longer. And after a while, I was like, I'm just going to move back home. So now I live in San Francisco. And in that, I remember thinking like, well, I'm very practical. Like I've been financially self-sustaining since I was 18, but I've been lucky enough that I had 2 careers that both made enough money that, and I don't cost a lot. So I actually was like, well, I actually could live off my savings and off, like if I invest well. And it happened that I had chosen, like in other words, there's a lot of luck involved in that. Like, yes, I made practical choices, but I didn't know when I chose computer science, it was going to turn into the incredibly, big career it was. I don't know that I can predict here's what one should do in order to get to X or Y result. But what I can say is that at every moment, I think you got to ask yourself what your values are, right? And if you're living in alignment with those values. And some of the time I'm not, like, a lot of the time I'm not in like minor ways, right? But if I drift too far, I think I feel it. And that's when I constantly course correct. And I think that practice probably results in the kind of films I make, right? Like they're these very sort of, like they come from an emotional place. They're like, I'm not thinking at all about the audience when I'm writing them. I don't even think they'll get made. And then but they then have a certain emotional specificity that probably comes from just, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my guess.
I read an interview with you in which you talked about how when you're on the set, you're constantly questioning why the camera is moving. You said you need to know what is the emotional motivation for the camera to move.
I'm not constantly questioning why the camera's moving. I've already planned my shots out. I'm planning my shots for emotional. So it's not, yes. So before we're even on set, I planned out all my shots, right?
So how does that work? Tell me about that idea of an emotional motivation for the camera to move.
There are directors who have a certain style where their camera just moves, right? And that's part of the style, and it's wonderful, and it's fun, and it's visceral. Especially, and maybe there'll be something I write someday where that makes sense, because I emotionally think that makes sense. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm trying to indicate something about the main character's world, that their world has this kind of high stakes swirling about, but then that is an emotional motivation, right? Like for me, what I don't love is when there's too much, I don't want to name films or TV series, but I can think of them where I'm watching and I'm like, why is the camera moving? I feel like the camera is honestly moving because somebody thought this will be cool, right? And I never think to myself, let's do it to look cool, because I think you wanna, everything has we're moving now to reveal this, but there's and now this informs the scene in a way, but there's but more often than not, it's like an emotional thing of the character's POV and what it does in terms of our understanding of how they're feeling. And every now and then, it's like I'm doing a very clear, when the texting is happening in the second diner move, that's a very clear, I really want to do this because it's fun. And there's but it's also informing her different states and her different worlds. But other than that, I mostly don't want people conscious of the camera moving. I want them to just feel. So the goal, and with music too, I don't want someone to be like, ooh, sweet song, right? Like you want to be watching and then you're like, I am crying now, but I'm not even thinking about the fact that, maybe it's because the score has drifted in, right? Like the goal is to try and keep people connected to the film, which generally to me means you want everything to sort of ride the emotion, not be pushing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How do you know, Alice, when you're on the set that you've got the emotion? Do you just feel it?
Mostly, yes. And honestly, sometimes you're not always going to know for sure. It's not because you don't know till you go into the editing room what you have. And sometimes you'll leave set and be because we were on a small budget. We shot the whole thing in 28 days, which is actually very aggressive on this film because we had train scenes, we had football games, we had car scenes, we had a bunch of running and bikes. So it was actually a very fast shoot. And it just meant I was constantly having to recut, change my shots and be oh, I'm not going to get these 5 shots. I have to come up with 2 shots. What will work, right? And actually a classic example, which will then inform your previous question, is there's a shot in the girls' bathroom between, Ellie and Aster, where it's literally all one shot and it's just racking focus between them. And we lost both our football field and our girls' bathroom the night before we were due to shoot those scenes, which we're all shooting in one day. So the girls' bathroom we're supposed to shoot in is now a totally different layout. So the 5 shots, they're all out the window. And also we ran out of, the football game. It was hailing that day, so we lost a bunch of time. So that ended up being that one shot, right? But I think it works better. There's something about that connection, right? Yeah. I did get one other shot just to save myself, where I did a master that I just don't think looks as good, but in case you could cut out to that. But really that whole thing was just us, me just sitting next to the AC, okay, rack to Aster, now rack to Ellie, now rack to Aster, now rack to Ellie, and then praying. But here's the thing, at the end of that night, if you asked me, did I get it? I wasn't 100% sure, right? But at a certain point, I also knew that we have to move on now, we can't go into overtime. But I think so. But I think the thing is this, film, anytime we make a film, it's a risk. There's really no point in making a film if it's 100% guaranteed, right? Why would you even do that? And I think part of the joy is you kind of have to embrace the fact that things are going to go wrong. It's not going to be exactly what you imagine. In fact, it's probably barely going to be 70% of what you imagined. But then some other things are going to be better. And some other things you're going to have to figure out how to problem solve around. But a lot of times that kind of exercise, like I'm never going to make a perfect film. I look at both my films, I see all the flaws, right? But I think that's okay. Like, I think there's, like, what you want to do is make the bravest film you can, right? Like, that's sort of the point, is to be like, you don't want to be so careful that you say all your coverage is going to be, like, I'm not a fan of just doing very simple, like, okay, single here, master, we're done, right? Like, and for maybe some things, but for the most part, I don't like that kind of coverage. I think, like, if you're going to do it, go for it. Try and tell a story. And
Be bold.
yes. And that might mean, and it does mean sometimes, that, like, you get into the edit room, it's like, that thing did not work out quite the way I wanted to work out. However, these other things far exceeded what I wanted, right? And I would rather have a film that has moments where you're like, oh, that was amazing. And okay, maybe this and this wasn't like as like technically wonderful or perfect as you imagined, but it's livable. Then everything is like equally pretty good. Is not, yeah.
It just feels more alive when the alchemy on the set comes together, I'm guessing.
Yes, exactly. And I think I also had a creative team that felt similarly. It's like, let's go for it, right? Because I'd always be like, no one makes a film to play it safe. Why are we playing it safe? Like, we should be responsible. We shouldn't do things that we go over budget. But as long as we're not doing that, I would rather go for it and get like coverage that I think is interesting than, feel like, okay, we have safe coverage.
Yeah. So, Alice, with this film, with The Farewell, with Crazy Rich Asians, with Never Have I Ever, there seems to be far more Asian representation now. How do you want to see this palette evolve?
So here's the thing. I left the industry 10 years ago. So I haven't been in the trenches like a lot of people. I sort of have these two films are separated by 15 years. It's almost like 2 data points, right? With like this. So it's almost like I've just came back, and it does feel like a different world. The thing I'm most excited about, though, is even like while I was out of the industry, maybe because my first film, Saving Face, just happened to a lot of Asian American and queer filmmakers who reach out to me over the years. And then coming back, there's so many more. Like, a lot of them are just on the cusp of making their first film or maybe pitching their first TV show. And there's so many more than there were when I was making my first film, And so I'm just excited to see what will happen, because it's inevitable. It's not like, I almost rather not guess at what will happen, because I suspect what's going to happen could be far more wonderful than I might hope for. Because I think this younger generation, they just have, I don't know. Yes, it's also, there are more outlets now with the streamers, and there's more an ability to do it yourself with my first film was shot on 35 millimeter. It's very hard, like, if you want to shoot on film, to do that without really pulling together a big crew. But now people are shooting films on their iPhone, right?
Sure.
And given all that, I think it's completely inevitable that we're going to get an explosion of incredible content that is going to be driven by a larger representation, more representative of the larger population, because more people are going to have access to the tools.
Which is so exciting.
Yeah.
So, Alice, in India, until 2 years ago, homosexuality was a crime. And thankfully, that has been recriminalized now. And in the last 2 years, we've already had 2 films where, mainstream A-list Bollywood stars have played roles in these movies. Is there, Alice, any sort of pointers that you can give to people here who are looking to tell more queer stories about what are the things that you should be mindful of?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Well, first I would say, because I'm not from, sorry, hang on, there's like a dialogue box that popped up. Because I'm not in India and don't fully understand what the political climate would be around being out as gay, I want to be thoughtful of that, because it's very easy for me from here to be like, you should go for it, because it's like, look, I came out when I was a senior in college, and it didn't feel particularly safe to do so back then in the early 90s. And I don't know if it is, like, in other words, I fully understand, and that may no longer be the case in India. Maybe it's totally okay, but I actually do really understand that feeling of, being thoughtful about, what is this going to mean for my family? What is this going to mean for the safety of various people? And if that's a concern, I think the first thing I would say is that that's really understandable, and not to feel, how do I put this? I think there's just a lot of ways to make art. And personally, as someone who grew up, like, I love my family, and I definitely am a very repressed person growing up. Like, there's so many things about that it's taken me, like, I just turned 50 a couple weeks ago, right? It's taken me a very long time in my life to sort of watch the world change, and to have the sort of openness that I currently have in my life. And I think that's a process. And I think it's a wonderful one for artists in a way, right? So I guess what I would say is, to a young queer artist or an old queer artist in India, that this is incredibly exciting, that this is something that's happening, and to just really honor your own personal experience of it. Like, you don't have to feel like, well, now it's my responsibility and I got to push this agenda, or I got to push that agenda. I think the work is truest when you acknowledge what's actually happening for you. Like, if that means writing sort of, repressed characters, like I've apparently made a living doing, and that's what feels true to you, great. If it means you're like ready to go out there and you're like ready to like shout from the rooftops, great. Like, it's whatever's actually feels right to you, because you just got to trust that you're not trying to serve every single demographic. What you can only do is serve the one that you can speak most honestly to. And there are going to be other people who might be disappointed by that, but that's okay. They'll be served by somebody else who is, like, there's going to be other people. Your attempt to serve everyone will probably just water down what you're trying to say. So I guess that's the thing I would say, is that ultimately, worry first about, does this thing feel emotionally true for me? And then let everything else sort of happen from there.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think, we're almost out of time, but I have to ask you, there's so much conversation about the emojis that is the last exchange at that train station, what they mean, the owl and the caterpillar with the glasses. So tell us, what do they mean?
Oh, I gotta leave that for people. That's not something I can say. But I will say this. What's really funny is, when I wrote the script, I'm somebody who really never uses emojis. Like, now I'm starting to, but I literally, for the longest time, was very cranky about the whole thing. And when I wrote the script, I honestly did not know that there was not a caterpillar with glasses emoji. I just assumed there would be. And we shot the film. And of course, it's like said in the line. So now it's not like, oh, we'll just swap it out for that. Like there's, but also I specifically, like, that one very specifically is like, a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, like glasses, like there's all sorts of things like representative, right? And so we had to design it. We actually got an emoji designer to design one, which I now secretly would love to get into the emoji library. I actually think it's a hilarious, it's like, we use pineapple now. Yeah, it's adorable. I basically told her, give me a caterpillar if a caterpillar was like Daria, which I don't know if you have Daria in it, but that character from MTV. So yeah.
How fun. And you're not going to tell us what it all means. We just have to try and put our own interpretation to it.
I think there's some interesting interpretations out there that are
Yes.
I think people are onto something.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, I feel like all three of them went on to have really fulfilling lives. Is that how you see their lives pan out?
Oh, I think this is the happiest ending possible for this kind of film, because I think it's sort of like a weird deconstruction or subversion of the classic romantic comedy or of Cyrano, where you're teased in with the idea of like, the question's going to be, are they going to get the girl? Who's going to get the girl? Right. And midway through, and I think several people have told me this, where they're watching or even reading the script, some people have told me this, where they start to get worried way through, where they're like, oh no, how's this going to end? Because you start to care about all three characters. So now you're like, well, if these two end up together, what about this person? If these two end up together, what about this person? If these two, like there's no super, like you start to worry. And the thing is, by the end of the movie, I think the whole point is like, oh, it doesn't really matter who gets the girl. What matters is that each of these people in their potential search for the perfect other half, right, which is doomed to failure. There is no perfect other half. And that's sort of the point of the film is, it's not about, there's no perfect other half person out there. It's that everyone you reach for and connect with shows you something about yourself if you choose to go there with them, and that those start to form the pieces of yourself and bring like a whole for yourself, right? So each of these three in their collision and their connection with each other either learn something about themselves or unmask something for themselves that they haven't wanted to admit, but now they're forced to admit to at least themselves. And in that moment, each of them sort of has given each other the confidence to take that next bold stroke, right? So Ellie finally is off to start her life. Paul, who genuinely loves living in Squamish and loves his family and loves food, finally is like taking over the family business, and the family's listening to him. Like finally he's like, I have ideas and I'm going to say them, right? Aster's finally considering art school and is like, you already get the sense she's going to leave Squamish. She's going to like apply and go back to painting, and I think these are all, and in fact, actually for Aster, it's very subtle, but the opening animation, I specifically, her sort of watercolor that she hands Ellie of the flower when they're in Paul's room, very specifically, I want, like, that's obviously indicated in the animation. There's a flower, right? And I would love, like, subtly, the inference could be that opening animation could have been Aster's submission to art school. Like, if you ever watch again, it's like, oh, all, like, it doesn't have to, but all these things are sort of woven. And in fact, when she's sketching in class, if you really look closely, she's actually sketching on Plato's Symposium of the other halves. And like, they're like twins that are breaking apart, right? So these are like subtle things, but the goal is like, oh, all three of these are going to become the people they need to be.
Which is so wonderful. So I'm going to end with a request. Please don't take another 15 years to make a film.
Okay, well, I'll do my best. But the truth of the matter is, like, I do sometimes think these things are like, I'm going to work hard, but the reality is I do think some of it is above my pay grade when something feels inspiring and when it feels, like, I don't think these films just came from me. I actually do think that there's some larger order to the universe. So if that is meant to be, I will do my absolute best. But otherwise, I'm very happy about how many other new voices are out there about to break out. But thank you so much for
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. It's been such a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Oh my God, thank you.
Again.
No, thank you so much for spreading the word too. I was like, I secretly, that's the other funny thing. When I made my thing for Ick Villain, I was like, listen, this is going to be great for like, because a number of my friends watched a cut and immediately like, oh my God. And I'm like, you have to realize, like, this is a bigger film than just in the US. Like, this could reach internationally. And so it's like it just makes me really happy that it did sort of end up, like that is something that people are connecting with all over the world. And especially like in India, being like, aha, we're seen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alice. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.